Hello, everybody, and welcome to New Life's New to Hear video class. We're awfully glad that you've chosen to watch these videos and to investigate what New Life is all about. And this is a class where we jump into that. This is session one of, of four sessions. And during this session, we're going to be talking about New Life's distinctives. These are the things that make New Life different from every other church. And I said different, not better. We're not into competing with other churches, but there are specific things that God has called us to do and to be that we have to be faithful to. And they are the things that actually distinguish New Life from other churches. In this session, and through all four sessions, we want to openly lay out New Life's culture and beliefs, our values and our strategies. We want to introduce you to New Life's organizational structure and staff. And we want to give you the opportunity to make New Life your church home, should you feel led to do that. Now, in the first two sessions, we're going to look at our distinctives. Specifically in this session, we're going to look at our culture, and then in video session number two, we're going to look at our strategies and our structures. Then videos number 3 and 4, we're going to delve into the subject of what it takes for us to thrive as we live here, and specifically, we're going to look at tools that we provide that actually help all of us thrive. So let's jump into our history, because in order to properly understand the church that New Life is today, we need to look back at where it got started. And it actually started with a call on my life. An interesting story out of my childhood. I was 13 or so years of age, a seventh grader sitting in a church where my father was the pastor, and he referenced a passage from the Bible in Acts chapter 2. I turned to that passage and began to read, and I don't remember what the teaching was on that day, but I do remember reading the entire chapter. And at the end of that chapter, there was this beautiful and wonderful description of the very first church on its birthday. This is the very, very first church that was planted in the entire world, and it was the very first day of its existence. And as the description goes, this was a church that everybody wanted to go to. And this was a church that was dynamically changing their lives. I mean, radically changing their lives. And this was a church that was having a massive impact on its community. And as I sat there in church and I looked around, I realized, the church I was a part of didn't seem to be any of those three. And I bowed my head and I began to pray, and I said, God, someday, if it's all the same to you, I'd like to be part of one of this kind of church. I've never seen one. I don't even know if they exist, but I would sure like to be part of that kind of a church. And so that was God's original calling in my life. Now, fast forward 27 years. Fast forward 34 years. And I'm on an airplane. I'm flying from Honolulu to Northern California to start New Life. And I'm on the plane, I'm processing things with God. And God said to me, hey, Ron, you remember that prayer that you prayed as a 13-year-old kid? That you wanted to be part of a church like the one you read about in the Bible? I said, yeah. He said, let's go build one of those together. And that really is where New Life got started. And it's not lost on me that God called me to come to Petaluma, which sits right in the heart of what many demographic studies have determined is the most unchurched area in our country. And God said, let's go make a difference. Let's go plant one of those churches in this place that needs it so badly. And so, as I continued to process things with God on that flight, God said to me, now listen, Ron, I don't want you to just start a church. I actually want you to pastor the city. I want you to love the people of the city, not just the people that go to the church you're going to start. And so those things were really key to the culture that now exists at New Life. Well, right away after I landed, I figured out I had to have a place for the church to meet, and I started calling available places, and there was nothing available, so I started calling schools, and none of the schools were open to churches. Oh, they said they were. So they said to me, Mr. Hunt, we'll be happy to rent to you and your church. Now, which 2 Sundays a year would you like? And I realized that was their way of dealing churches out. A friend of mine happened to pass to me a written opinion from California State Attorney General in which he referenced that facilities use policy and clearly delineated that it was counter to the actual constitution of our state. And so I had a lawyer write a very kind and nice letter to all 7 school districts and ask them to consider changing their facilities use policy to bring it into compliance with the California state constitution. And in less than 2 weeks, without going to a single school board meeting and getting involved in an ugly fight, in less than 2 weeks, God moved in such a way that every school in our city became open to churches. And it was obvious to me from the beginning, God's hand was on our church, and we weren't even meeting yet. Well, we were a very low-budget church plant, $70,000 total, over 2 years' time, and it had to include my salary. So that's a low-budget church plant. And when we decided to do a grand opening, we spent $10,000 on an advertising campaign to reach every home in the Petaluma area. And we sat there the morning of our grand opening and waited to see who would come. And little did we know what God had in store. The rain was blowing, the wind was blowing, the rain was coming down in sheets. I mean, even people that went to church every Sunday didn't want to go on that Sunday. And I remember getting so upset with God and saying, you could do way better than this. Even people that go to church don't want to go to church on this day. Nobody in their right mind is going to show up at our grand opening. But when it was time for church to start, in the last 10 minutes before starting time, 245 people streamed through the doors of that multipurpose room at Sonoma Mountain School, and we were off and running, and I was so totally blown away. Now, there's so many stories out of our history I could tell you. But just giving you the short course, the building we now meet in is the 15th different location we have met in as a church for a worship service. I mean, if you could find us, you were probably going to have a good time. But it was hard, and we were a set up and tear down church with 2 big, long, 24-foot long trailers packed to the gills with video system and PA system and stuff for the children's ministry and stuff for the lobby, and it was just amazing. And we did that for 10 straight years. And then God said, to our leadership team, you got to get this church ready for where I'm going to take them. And so we went through this spiritual journey we called Ready, and it was designed to raise the funds that we would need in order to get a more permanent location, something we could use 24/7. And we hired an outside company, and they said, send us your last 3 years of financials. We did that. And they said, we've done this with like 3,500 churches. You can expect to raise $250,000, probably without trying too hard. If you try really hard, maybe 500,000. If somebody chips in with a monstrous gift, maybe 750,000. And so we went to work and we prayed and we mobilized teams. And at the end of that program, the people of New Life had committed $1.25 million over and above their regular giving to the church. And that was the seed money that God used to bring us to the campus where we are today. You see, the story of New Life's history is one of divine intervention. As many of you know, this is a town that is not construction and development friendly. Oftentimes when people acquire a property, it's not unusual for it to take 5 to 10 years for them to be able to use that property as they had originally intended. Well, we were able to buy, our current building was a giant warehouse for a home improvement chain called Yardbirds. And converting that to A1 assembly space is a massive conversion process that requires retrofitting. It required all sorts of permits from the city and so forth. It was all set up to take years to actually get all that stuff in place. But God so intervened on our behalf that from the day we got the keys to this building, to the day that we had our very first church service in our completely built out structure with all the permits and all the inspections and the permit to occupy, was 11 months. To this day, when I tell that story to people in our city, their mouths drop open. Our history is one of divine intervention. Virtually everything in our building has been donated. It is an absolute miracle. Now, along the way, we've had lots of peaks. In fact, one of them that I am maybe most happy about is that in 26 years of our history, we have baptized nearly 1,000 people in this church, in this area where supposedly no one is looking for a church. Only God could do that. Along the way, we have helped start 2 churches in Sonoma County. We have built 3 church buildings in India. We've helped start 2 churches in India. We have helped start a church in Mexico. We have built countless houses in Mexico for homeless families. We've built another church building in Mexico. We are currently mentoring 21 pastors in India. We're mentoring 1 pastor in Mexico. And we have forged 9 partnerships with nonprofits in our community. And we are really making a difference. We're having a community-wide impact. And friends, that's just the mountain peaks along our journey. There are so many mountaintop experiences that have been part of our history, which is exactly what you would expect of a church where God is the one who is leading and guiding. But we have also had our share of valleys, times that were really hard and really tough. 3 times New Life's culture that I'm going to be teaching us about over the next few minutes has been seriously challenged from the inside. I often say of Noah, the guy in the Bible who built the ark to survive the flood, I have often said of Noah, Noah's biggest danger was not the storm on the outside. It was the woodpeckers on the inside who could peck a hole in his boat and sink it. And the biggest challenges New Life has faced have almost always come from within. Several times, New Life has had to let staff members go. That's always hard. It's hard to understand. It's hard to do. It's hard to keep people in unity around having to do that. We have faced two very serious financial challenges in the past 26 years, times when our church very nearly ran out of money. And it's really hard to move an organization forward when it doesn't have a reserve fund. We have experienced two leadership transitions that simply didn't work. When I was ready to retire, we brought in two different lead pastors. One who was here for 4.5 years, the other was here 2.5 years. And at the end of those time frames, it was very clear to everyone this was not working. They were failed leadership transition projects. And that was hard, really hard. And on top of that, during COVID, because of regulations in this area, we went 22 straight months without being able to meet together. That's hard. Yes, we did church online, but you have no idea who's watching, how many people are watching, how connected they are with the church. And in fact, you don't really know till you open the doors again how many people are still there. And the re-engagement rate in this area across the board in churches was 22%. So if you had 100 people before the church closed down for COVID, when you reopened the doors, 22 showed up. Yeah, that was a valley, a very difficult valley. Now, there's an important lesson from our history that I want you to know, and that is this. This is God's church. He owns it. He leads it himself. We are his children. We walk with him. We get our directions from him, and we work to faithfully lead the church as he directs. That might be the most important thing I say to you in this session. New Life doesn't belong to Pastor Shane. It doesn't belong to the stewards. It doesn't belong to me as the founding pastor. Our church belongs to Jesus. It belongs to God. And we have been called simply to follow his directions and his leading. Now, this is the mission he's given us, to connect people to the life and the love of Jesus by loving others the way Jesus loves us all. Now, you notice the words life and love are in yellow, and they are because we don't want to just connect people to the rules of Jesus or the commands or the instructions, even though in the right context, those are all important. The most important things that we can connect ourselves to and the people of our community to are the life of Jesus and the love of Jesus. And where we start always is by loving all people the way Jesus loves all of us. So you'll find that our heartbeat is this. And we usually say it in these three statements. Everybody's loved, nobody's perfect, anything's possible. Loving everybody is where we always begin. There's no caveats to that. There's no qualifications needed, and there's no exceptions to that. No matter who you are, no matter what you look like, no matter what you believe, no matter what you might practice, no matter what you have done or are currently doing, it doesn't make any difference. If you're a person, we're going to love you just as you are. The second thing is we understand nobody's perfect. Jesus understood that. He understood that every person that he encountered was broken in some way, that this world we live in is a broken world. I think we all see the brokenness all around us in this world, and we each have our own share of brokenness that we carry with us. And the great thing about Jesus was he was never surprised by the brokenness in anyone, and he never connected shame to it, and neither do we. We don't make any attempt to hide our own brokenness, and we encourage everyone who comes to our church not to hide their brokenness either. Let's get honest about that stuff. Let's get vulnerable about that stuff. Because when we're honest and vulnerable, it opens the door to the third statement, anything's possible. When you put God in the equation, and when you trust him with your brokenness, we have learned over the years, God can make anything out of anybody. The Apostle Paul was a Christian hater. He was a Jesus hater. And he, not just kind of hater, big time hater. He used to bust into church services, and he used to arrest the fathers and the mothers and throw them in prison and have them tried for capital punishment and have them executed. And he left those kids orphans. Yeah. And yet, God took that man and made him perhaps the most prolific church planter the world has ever seen. And in fact, he wrote nearly half of the New Testament in your Bible and mine. You see, God can make anything out of anybody. And that means we have learned to live generously. Here's our generosity statements. We intentionally create a culture of unconditional love, full and immediate acceptance, and radical generosity to all, because we believe that's how Jesus has always reached people. That combination is virtually impossible for people to reject. Unconditional love, full and immediate acceptance, and radical generosity. So we live generously toward each other because it gives us the opportunity to practice grace toward each other in the midst of our common brokenness. Also, we believe God calls us to invest our lives, our time, our talents, and our treasures in others. He calls us to this generous lifestyle where we are continually giving away our time, continually giving away our skills and abilities, continually giving away whatever possessions God has entrusted to our care, and doing it in a way that blesses the people around us. And we have found that as we live generously, we find joy and we find fulfillment. And maybe most importantly, we find our lives are making a fantastic difference. So as we look back on this session, we have talked about the history and the heart of our church and the fact that it belongs to God, and it always will. There's no power struggle here. God has it all. We've also looked at the culture of our church in terms of generosity and its heartbeat. These are such important things. And the fact that you've come to this class or are watching this video probably means you've been to New Life at least once or twice, and you have picked up that there's a very special culture in the church. Friends, that didn't happen by accident. That's all intentional, and it's all because of the presence of Jesus in our church. Now, in the next session, we're going to look at our strategies. That's what we do. We're going to look at our structure. That's how we're organized. And we're going to look at, if you took our church and peel back all of its layers like an onion, when you get way down to the core, we're going to take a look at what's at the very core of our church. Thank you for giving me your time, and I look forward to seeing you in session number 2.